Good evening, I'm David Kramer with Alaska Weather. As always, please visit our website, weather.gov/Alaska. You can get updates to the forecast or check out any watches, warnings, or advisories that we might have out for your area. You can also call our weather info line, 1-800-472-0391. You get any updates to the forecast through that means as well. And you can email me at the address at the bottom of the screen, david.kramer@noaa.gov. Starting off, we'll take a look at our weather ahead for south central Alaska. First off is the Anchorage and Mat-Su valleys. Tonight we're still going to have some showers, only about a 30% chance, and then temperatures dropping into the mid-40s to lower 50s. Rain ending throughout the evening hours. And then on Thursday, going to see some pretty nice weather where we're going to have temperatures getting back up into the mid-70s, just a few showers in the afternoon. And then for tonight, for the Kenai Peninsula, temperatures dropping down to the mid-40s to lower 50s. Rain as well, ending throughout the evening hours. And then on Thursday, things picking up, becoming sunnier, especially in the afternoon. Or we'll just have some isolated cloud cover, especially out over the mountains. And then temperatures are going to get back up into the mid-60s to mid-70s. Down in southeast Alaska, a little bit different story here. Some decent weather, all things considered, for the rest of today. But as we move into Thursday, a lot of rain coming back into the area for the Panhandle. And then the best break as we move into the weekend is going to be on Friday, where chances of rain are going to be between 20 and 40% depending on your location in the Panhandle. But then picking back up on Saturday up to 70% chance, and then heavier rain as we move into Sunday. Taking a look at our fire danger, the only area of concern right now with all the rain that we've been having is in the very western portions between the Brooks Range and in between the Kotzebue Sound area, where we are going to see some high fire danger areas out there. For our satellite imagery, we'll focus on one of the systems moving up towards the western Aleutian Islands with its front pushing through the central Aleutians, bringing some rain to these areas, and part of that warm front with this extending out and bringing rain to the eastern Aleutian Islands as well. As we watch this again, we can see a system moving into the northern portions of the Gulf from the southern mainland that's bringing more rain into the Panhandle or the south central area right now, but is going to be one of the factors that brings rain to the Panhandle area on Thursday. And as we watch again, we can see out over the northern portions of the Bering and out over some of the mainland part of the state as well, some of the darker colors for the clouds indicating that we have some lower cloud cover in a lot of those areas where we have some fog out over portions of the Bering Sea, especially along the coastline as we get further to the north. And as we look up very far north up over the Arctic coastline area, we can see a system starting to come in, not quite to our area, but we can see the cloud cover out ahead of that moving in towards the Arctic coastline with some of the cloud cover already making it to the coast. However, the main system will still be further to the north for now. As we look at the remainder of today's weather, we'll start off with our system where the main low is moving into the western Aleutian Islands, bringing its frontal system through the southern Bering and central and eastern Aleutians, bringing rain to those areas with a mixture of rain and fog for the eastern Aleutians and out by the Pribilof Islands. A little bit of ridging still remaining over the eastern part of the Bering Sea, keeping a little brief reprieve before more rain for southwest Alaska. As we move further to the north under the effects of that high pressure, we are going to see some fog in the Norton Sound area of St. Lawrence Island, up in the Kotzebue Sound area, and then along the Arctic coastline as we move further to the east, expecting that fog to mix with rain. However, in the mainland part of the state, as we get away from the water, we're seeing more shower activity, especially for the central and eastern portions of the interior, where we are seeing some isolated afternoon and evening thunderstorms in the area. So we drop down into the south central area, primarily rain showers, and that's going to be true down into the Panhandle area, especially for the northern locations of the Panhandle. Then as we move into tonight, the low that was forming out over the northern portions of the Gulf is now pushed off to the east, bringing more rain back to the Panhandle area, and that's going to be progressively increasing throughout the nighttime hours as that low continues to push to the east. And there's also going to be rain from that low out over southern portions of south central Alaska, including all along the North Gulf Coast and Prince William Sound. Some remaining showers out over the Alaska Range and in portions of the interior. And then more rain as that next system over the Arctic area comes in, bringing rain and fog to the Arctic coastline down into much of the northwest coast as well. Some areas of fog underneath high pressure for the Seward Peninsula area down into the YK Delta. And then our system that was out by the western Aleutians, that main low is now pushed into the southern portions of the Bering Sea, extending its front further to the east, now over the eastern Aleutians and Alaska Peninsula, with rain and fog out ahead of it for much of the central and eastern Bering, including the Pribilof Islands, as well as the Alaska Peninsula and eastern Aleutians. Behind this system, we're seeing rain for the western and central Aleutian Islands. Then on Thursday, that system's starting to occlude even more, extending its front out through the Pribilof Islands area, down over the Alaska Peninsula with rain throughout the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands, extending into the Alaska Peninsula as well, and starting to make its way to the southwest coastline where we're starting to see some of that rain out ahead of that front. Still going to have some lingering areas of fog, especially in the morning hours for the Norton Sound area, St. Lawrence Island area. Then a mix of rain and fog up along the west coast and Arctic coastlines as our low pressure system has now moved in over the Utqiagvik area. Down in the mainland part of the state, we have some showers out through much of the interior. And again, the potential for isolated thunderstorms over the eastern portions of the interior in the afternoon and evening hours. Some lingering showers for south central, especially in northern locations, and then some areas of showers for all of the Panhandle area to include the Yakutat area as our low pressure system is now moved right near the Panhandle area in the eastern portions of the Gulf. And as we move into Friday, some of those showers starting to clear up, especially as we have some weak ridging moving in over the Panhandle area. Then we have another system forming out over the eastern or northern portions of the Gulf of Alaska, extending its front and out over the central portions of the Gulf and sending rain up all along the North Gulf Coast through much of south central Alaska, southwest Alaska, and down into Kodiak Island. Through the mainland part of the state, we're going to see showers throughout most locations with potential for afternoon and evening thunderstorms for eastern places of the interior, and some rain along the Arctic coastline down much of the west coast. And our old low finally starting to weaken out over southern Bering Sea, still bringing rain to the central and eastern Aleutian Islands as well as the Alaska Peninsula. Taking a look at our temperatures for Thursday morning, lows for the Aleutians dropping down into the mid-40s, lower 50s for the Alaska Peninsula, mid-40s for much of southwest Alaska, extending into much of the interior and west coast as well, a little bit warmer in the interior, upper 40s there, and then down into the upper 30s to lower 40s along the Arctic coastline, down into the upper to mid-40s for much of south central Alaska, and lower 50s for the Panhandle. Thursday afternoon highs in the Panhandle getting right around 60 degrees, right around 70 degrees for much of the south central area, lower 60s for much of the interior and southwest Alaska, right around 50 degrees for the Seward Peninsula, and mid 40s to lower 50s along the Arctic coastline. Down in the Aleutians, right around 50 degrees expected highs. Lows for Friday morning, mid 40s for much of the Aleutian Islands, right around 50 degrees for much of southwest Alaska and the interior, mid 40s along the remainder of the west coast, and down to the 30s for some of the Arctic coastline, around 50 degrees for south central and for the Panhandle. Friday afternoon highs getting up into the lower 60s for the Panhandle, mid to upper 60s for south central Alaska, lower 60s for the interior and southwest Alaska, 50s along much of the coast, 40s for Kotzebue Sound area, 30s for the Arctic coastline, then up into the mid 50s for the Alaska Peninsula, and right around 50 degrees for the Aleutian Islands.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
For our aviation section, we'll start off with our flying weather on Thursday morning. Out over the Bering Sea and Aleutian Island system moving through the area, bringing MVFR and IFR conditions to the area, with some of those MVFR conditions extending into the southwest coastline. Up along the Arctic coastline, going to see some more MVFR conditions. And then down in south central Alaska and the mountain areas, we are going to see some MVFR conditions that are going to extend down into the Panhandle as well, with northern locations seeing IFR. On Thursday afternoon, MVFR conditions remaining for much of the Panhandle area, with IFR conditions now in the southern locations. Southern portions of mainland Alaska up into the interior, going to see primarily VFR conditions, but as we get into western portions of the Brooks Range and up along the Arctic coast, expecting to see a mixture of MVFR and IFR. Down in the Aleutians and Bering Sea, we're going to see primarily MVFR and IFR conditions, and some more of those MVFR conditions extending into southwestern areas of the coast. For Friday morning, going to start to drag in some IFR conditions to the southwest coastline, now to include the Bristol Bay area and Kodiak Island, and the rest of the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands going to see some MVFR and IFR conditions. Southern portions of the mainland should primarily remain VFR, but as we get to the northern locations of the interior and up to the Arctic coastline, we are going to see some MVFR and IFR conditions. Down in the Panhandle area and the Yakutat area, we are going to see MVFR Friday morning. Friday afternoon, going to continue to see the MVFR conditions for the Panhandle extending through much of the Gulf and much of the North Gulf coastline for much of south and western portions of south central Alaska, down into southwest Alaska, where we will see some mixture of IFR conditions for the YK Delta area. Not much of the west coast going to see MVFR conditions. It's going to extend out over the Brooks Range and Arctic coastline, where right along the coast we will see some IFR as well. Down in the Bering Sea, primarily MVFR, and then some IFR mixing in for the Aleutian Islands. For our passes starting up north at AKwx, going to start off VFR dropping down to marginal conditions in the afternoon. However, Adigan Pass should stay VFR throughout the day on Thursday. Lake Cochrane and Merrill should both also be VFR throughout the day on Thursday. However, Rainy Pass will start off marginal, improving to VFR conditions in the afternoon. Windy Pass will also start off MVFR, improving to VFR conditions in the afternoon. Isabel Pass starting off marginal, improving to VFR. However, there is the chance for some isolated thunderstorms to pop up in the afternoon in the mountains. Mentasta Pass also going to start off MVFR, improving to VFR, and once again there's going to be a chance for isolated thunderstorms in the mountains in the afternoon. Down at Dehne Pass, VFR conditions are expected, as well as at Portage, and then Chilkoot and White should both be IFR, improving to marginal conditions in the afternoon. For our freezing levels, area of colder air extending down from the northern portions of the state down to the southeast, with freezing levels at 6,000 feet near Yakutat and 4,000 feet along the Arctic coastline. Area of warmer air extending up from the North Pacific out over the Alaska Peninsula at around 12,000 feet, with areas of 14,000 feet just to the south. And then pockets of colder air as we get further to the west, 6,000 feet by the central and western Aleutian Islands. For our icing in the southern portions of the Bering Sea, above 9,000 feet is expected. And for the interior and up along the Arctic coastline, above 8,000 feet is expected. Then areas around Yakutat and southern portions of the Panhandle, above 10,000 feet is expected. For our jet stream, strongest portion of the jet moving into the central and eastern Aleutian Islands out of a southwesterly direction, 120 knots, dropping off to around 75 to 80 knots near the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island, and then increasing back up to around 140 knots out of a northwesterly direction to the south of the Panhandle. However, winds over the Panhandle more southerly, around 40 knots. Another branch of the jet around 90 knots over the northwestern portion of the state, and then we have some winds at 75 knots out of the east for the northern portions of the Bering. Dropping down to 9,000 feet, circulation around our low is around 40 to 45 knots for the western locations out of a northerly direction, 35 knots out of the south by the Pribilofs, and around 50 knots just to the south of the Aleutian Islands out of a westerly direction. Over the northern portions of the state, westerly winds around 40 knots, and then some more winds around 40 knots out of the west just to the south of the Panhandle. Down to 3,000 feet, 30 knots out of a westerly direction in the southern portions of the Gulf to the south of the Panhandle area, diminishing as we get over the Panhandle. Westerly winds 35 to 40 knots over the northwestern coastline of the state, diminishing as we get more over mainland Alaska, and then continuing to see stronger winds around our low pressure system out over the Bering. Northerly winds around 50 knots by the western Aleutians, dropping down to 35 to 40 knots and becoming out of the west for the central Aleutians, out over the Alaska Peninsula, out of the southerly direction, 30 knots there. Then become more southeasterly as we get up by St. Matthew Island, and around 35 knots for that location. Two areas of turbulence as we move into Thursday. Starting off with those stronger winds out over the western Aleutian Islands, we are expecting turbulence to be around 3,000 feet there. As we move up into areas around the central and western portions of the Brooks Range, expecting turbulence to be below 4,000 feet, should be primarily in the mountains.
Dual polarization technology is a major upgrade to the current radar system. It allows forecasters a better idea of what's actually out there and can help keep you safe.
Current radar technology transmits and receives information in the horizontal direction, which is very limited. Dual polarization technology, in addition to the horizontal, transmits and receives vertical energy, which allows forecasters to get information about the size, shape, and phase of the precipitation. We can use that information to better determine the precipitation type to expect at your given location.
There you have it. This new technology is currently being installed in radars across the country and is already being used by National Weather Service forecasters to produce better, more accurate forecasts. Learn more here and follow us. Want to know about the future of weather radar? Well, the National Severe Storms Lab has it here with its new phased array radar. Let's check it out.
It's a non-moving radar. It has 4 faces of the antenna, each pointing in different directions. One of the big advantages is that we're seeing so far, it can sample the area around the radar in less than a minute, maybe even a half a minute. And this is 5-6 times faster than what they can do today.
NSSL is leading the development of future weather radar with this project. Learn more here and follow us. The Storm Prediction Center is one of the NOAA weather partners. They are located in the National Weather Center in Norman, Oklahoma. Greg Carbon gives us a glimpse into what the SPC does.
Our mission is to analyze and forecast severe thunderstorms and the potential for tornadoes, large hail, and damaging winds from those thunderstorms across the lower 48 states, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. One of the primary missions of the Storm Prediction Center is the issuance of severe thunderstorm and tornado watches across the country when conditions appear to be coming together to support the development of severe thunderstorms and tornadoes.
The world-class meteorologists in the Storm Prediction Center specialize in severe weather and keeping you safe. Learn more here and follow us.
The National Severe Storms Lab is working on increasing the lead time for severe weather warnings. The national average for tornado warnings is currently 13 minutes, but more notice would be helpful, especially for those in charge of moving large groups to shelter. Warn on Forecast will help forecasters issue hazardous weather warnings earlier. The project will give them more info about the chances of strong winds, large hail, and even tornadoes.
Currently, warnings are created by forecasters looking at the atmosphere outside, understanding its volatility, and then comparing that to how they see the Doppler radar presenting what's going on inside thunderstorms. Warn on Forecast is an idea where we're going to take the massive amounts of satellite, radar, and surface data and stick them all into a very high resolution prediction model. And then by producing new forecasts every 15 or 20 minutes, the forecasters hopefully will be able to use that model to produce warnings that extend out to an hour.
Before the National Weather Service can use this tool, it must be developed and tested. One big challenge will be deciding how to get the model predictions to the forecasters.
I'm going to keep this one very low. I'm just adjusting the track.
These hazardous weather prediction models are going to produce a huge amount of output. And this fire hose of data is just too much for forecasters to handle in real time quickly. So in order to help deal with that, NSSL has developed a related project called Facets. And Facets is the methodology which will enable forecasters to focus very quickly on the most important threats.
Once Warn on Forecast and Facets are proven to be reliable and effective, then forecasters will be better able to inform you of threats nearby. Learn more here and follow us.
The Hazardous Weather Test Bed is located at the National Weather Center in Norman, Oklahoma. It is used for experiments that will allow forecasters to learn and apply new technologies.
The Hazardous Weather Test Bed is a really unique space throughout all of NOAA. And this is where the researchers and the operational folks come together in a common space to solve operational problems and to test new research tools that the research community is working on. The goal is to accelerate the transfer from research to operations of the newest tools and techniques.
People come from around the world to collaborate on this unique project.
We can bring together not only NOAA people, but also university people, faculty, researchers, private sector meteorologists, folks working in other countries in meteorology, forecasters can all come together and focus on what the problem of the day is with the forecasters.
Each spring, several experiments occur in the Hazardous Weather Test Bed. Learn more here and follow us.
What are you looking at? And what are you ignoring? Did you notice the NOAA logo in the corner? Forecasters have a lot of information in front of them too. Every second counts during severe weather, and decisions about where to focus are constantly being made. This could be even more challenging in the future. Phased array radar will produce 4 to 6 times more information than what we have now, which brings us to the question researchers are hoping to answer. Will more radar information affect forecasters' decisions?
From our past experiments, we've learned a lot about how forecasters think during the warning decision process, but we've also learned that those thought processes are very complex, and for that reason, we need a better way to be able to track forecasters' cognitive activity.
Inbounds and possibly golf ball sized hail.
An eye tracker is a piece of technology that is used to determine in real time where someone's eye gaze is located. And these eye trackers are typically video-based, which means a camera sits below a computer monitor, and with infrared light and vector analysis, we can determine where a person is looking and how their eyes are moving.
Eye tracking is already being used in the medical field and air traffic control. Using similar research methods, NSSL is discovering the benefit for weather forecasting too. Phased array radar will give forecasters a lot more to think about. Understanding their decision-making process will help researchers develop even more user-friendly tools. So what's the benefit for you? Even better weather warnings. To learn more, check us out online and follow us on Facebook and Twitter.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
For our marine section, we'll start off with a look at our ice edge. Out over the Chukchi Sea, we do have some areas around the shoals that are continuing to melt out fairly rapidly. And then along the Arctic coastline from Utqiagvik out by Kaktovik, we still have some lingering ice. However, with the winds that we do have coming up, we do expect some movement of that ice. Down in the southeastern portions of the state on Thursday, in the inside waters, southerly winds are expected, 10 to 15 knots. Out in the eastern portions of the Gulf, westerly winds 20 to 25 knots, diminishing as we get further to the north. Out of a north to west direction, 10 to 15 knots. Seas as high as 6 feet, highest in the eastern portions of the Gulf. Then on Friday, in the inside waters, southerly winds 10 to 15 knots are expected. Out over the Gulf waters, primarily around 10 knots. Out of a westerly direction and more southern locations, becoming southerly as we get further to the north, and then picking up as we get further to the west out of a southerly direction, around 20 knots is expected. For south central areas on Thursday, out over the Gulf, we have west to northwest winds, 15 to 25 knots, strongest as we get closer towards the Barren Islands. Then on the western side of the Barren Islands, westerly winds 25 knots. For Cook Inlet, northwesterly flow of 10 knots, and then in Prince William Sound, northwesterly winds 15 knots there. For Friday, flow switching up and becoming southerly throughout the area. In Cook Inlet down through Kamishak Bay, we have southerly winds 10 knots, 15 knots through much of the Gulf, and a little bit stronger as we get further out to the east. 20 knots is expected further out. And then in Prince William Sound, southeast winds 10 knots are expected. Seas as high as 6 feet, highest to the east of the Barren Islands. For the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island areas on Thursday, starting off around Kodiak Island, westerly winds 20 knots are expected. 10 knots out of a southeasterly direction in Bristol Bay area, getting up to as high as 20 knots out of a southeasterly direction as we get closer towards Cold Bay on the Bering side. On the Pacific side, south of Sand Point, southerly winds 25 knots expected, diminishing to 15 knots and becoming southwesterly as we get east of Chignik. For Friday, flow around Kodiak Island becoming southwesterly 15 knots. Southwesterly 15 knots also in Bristol Bay, becoming southerly at 20 knots north of Cold Bay. As we move to the Pacific side, southwesterly winds 25 knots near Sand Point, and then 20 knots out of the west east of Chignik. For the Aleutian Islands, starting off for the central and eastern Aleutian Islands, southwesterly winds 20 knots to as high as 30 knots, weakest by the eastern Aleutians, strongest on the Pacific side of the central Aleutians. Continuing to be around 30 knots as we move by the western Aleutian Islands, switching from southwesterly to northwesterly as we push further to the west. Seas as high as 11 feet near the central Aleutian Islands, particularly on the Pacific side. Then on Friday, staying out west, we have northwesterly winds by the western Aleutians, 25 knots, picking up to 30 knots out of the west as we get east of Kiska. And then for the central Aleutians, west to northwest flow, 20 to 30 knots, strongest on the Pacific side. And then as we move closer towards the eastern Aleutian Islands, south to southwest winds 20 to 30 knots, again strongest on the Pacific side. Seas as high as 13 feet, highest on the Pacific side. For Thursday, along the west coast, starting up north in the Norton Sound area, southwest winds at 15 knots, getting up to 20 knots closer to St. Lawrence Island. Around Nunavik Island, east to southeast winds 25 knots, picking up by St. Matthew Island to 30 knots there, seas as high as 10 feet. And then down by the Pribilof, southeast winds 25 knots. As we move into Friday along the west coast in Norton Sound area, westerly winds 10 knots, stronger by St. Lawrence Island, northerly winds 20 knots, diminishing down to 15 as we get closer to Nunavik Island, and switching direction to become more southerly south of Nunavik Island, 15 knots, 10 knots by the Pribilof Islands. Along the Arctic coastline on Thursday, we have southerly winds 10 to 15 knots. Along the west coast, southwesterly winds 25 knots, 20 knots through the Bering Strait area. Then on Friday, flow becoming more northerly along the west coast, 20 to 25 knots. And then along the Arctic coastline, 15 to 20 knots, until we get by Kaktovik, where we have southerly winds 10 knots. Recap of our weather for tonight. We have a low pressure system moving into the Bering Sea, bringing rain throughout the Bering and Aleutian Islands, with areas of fog as we get further to the east. And we'll have some fog in the Bristol Bay area, extending up to the YK Delta area and Seward Peninsula, and then a mixture of rain and fog as we get along the Arctic coastline. Down in the interior, thunderstorms this evening are going to diminish, and then we'll have some lingering showers through the night for central and eastern locations of the interior, and some showers for south central and the Panhandle. On Thursday, we're going to have some more rain for the Panhandle area and up through the Yakutat area. Then in the interior portions of the state, showers are expected. And then for eastern locations of the interior, we are going to see the potential for thunderstorms in the evening and afternoon hours. Along the Arctic coastline, a mixture of rain and fog, and then rain throughout the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands as our low pressure system continues to move through the Bering.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.